We recently did a video of the top 10 slave owners. I'll post a link towards the end of this video. And the story of Anthony Johnson kind of caught my attention more than the others. So we're going to do a little dive in and get some more information about it and to learn more about him as a person. So let's go ahead and dive into the video. Come on.
The vast majority of African Americans in the United States were enslaved, in all of the states, not just the South. Our first person of note is Anthony Johnson, who was born in Angola and captured by Portuguese slave traders, and he was given the name Antonio. Then his captors sold him into the Atlantic slave trade. He sailed to Virginia in 1621 aboard the ship James. The Virginia muster, or census, of 1624 lists his name as Antonio, not given, and he was recorded as a Negro in the notes column and indentured. Antonio, later Anthony, was bought by a colonist in Virginia, but treated as an indentured servant, which was not unusual, and Antonio worked for a merchant at the Virginia Company, and he became a Catholic. Johnson was sold as an indentured servant to a white planter named Bennett to work on his Virginia tobacco farm. Technically, he was not a slave, because the slave laws were not passed until 1661 in Virginia, so prior to that date, Africans were not officially considered to be slaves in that colony. According to the records kept by his benefactor and the existing documents, Anthony was nearly killed in the Indian Massacre of 1622 when the Powhatan Indians attacked colonists in the Tidewater region of Virginia. On Good Friday, they raided the settlement, including the Bennett farm, where Antonio worked, and killed 52 of the 57 men present. Antonio apparently fought back and was wounded and earned the esteem of his master. In 1623, a black woman named Mary...
Hold on. So, I guess the Indians fought back against the colonists, you know what I mean, who were on their land, I guess fought back. And I wonder if the Indians were killing the slaves as well, I guess, attacking the slaves as well. And that's why Antonio fought back. Or did he just fight back because he was fighting for his owner at the time? It's kind of interesting. Hold on real quick, y'all.
Anthony was nearly killed in the Indian Massacre of 1622 when the Powhatan Indians attacked colonists in the Tidewater region of Virginia. On Good Friday, they raided the settlement, including the Bennett farm, where Antonio worked, and killed 52 of the 57 men present. Antonio apparently fought back and was wounded and earned the esteem of his master. In 1623, a black woman named Mary arrived aboard the ship Margaret and John. She was brought to work on the same plantation as Antonio, where she was the only woman present. Antonio and Mary married and lived together for more than 40 years. Around 1635, Antonio and Mary completed their indentured servitude, and Antonio changed his name to Anthony Johnson. He first entered the legal record as an unindentured free man when he purchased a calf in 1647. During this early period, free blacks enjoyed relative equality with whites, and about 20% of the free blacks in Virginia owned their own homes and property. In 1662, the Virginia colony passed a law that children in the colony were born with the social status of their mother. This meant that the children of slave women were born into slavery, even if their fathers were free, European, Christian, and white. This was a reversal.
So that kind of makes sure, that rule or law kind of makes sure that blacks remain slaves, because you have to bear, mothers bear all their children, so if the mother's a slave. So the only way you can get a free slave, there's really no way unless the mom is free. So if the mom ain't free, you can't even marry or have kids with black slave at that time, because if you had children with them, they would also be slaves as well under this rule. Even
if their fathers were free, European, Christian, and white. This was a reversal of English common law, which held that the children of English subjects took the status of their father. The Virginia colonial government expressed the opinion that since Africans were not Christians, common law could not and did not apply to them, even if they converted, as Anthony Johnson did. On July 24, 1651, Johnson acquired 250 acres of...
It's like they're gonna make any kind of rule or any kind of law. They're gonna find a way to navigate around it to make sure the slaves or indentured servants remain slave in the indentured servants. there's always like a workaround or a loophole for the minorities here. Let's get back into it.
And under the existing headright system when he bought the contracts of 5 indentured servants, one being his son, Richard Johnson. Under the headright system, if a man were to bring indentured servants over to the colonies, and in this particular case Johnson brought 5 servants, he was owed 50 acres a head for servant. The land in question was located on the Great Naswata Creek,
That's
which
crazy.
flowed into the Punkateague River in Northampton County, Virginia. This was where Anthony Johnson operated his successful tobacco farm, and one of his indentured servants was John Cassor, who became one of the first men to be declared indentured for life, effectively a slave. Under the 1645 Virginia Taxation Act, all Negro men and women and all other men from the age of 16 to 60 shall be judged tithable. So after a fire in 1652 caused him great financial damage to his property, he applied for relief in the courts and won. Back then, people were taxed, not property, but indentured servants and later slaves were taxed as property. It is unclear from the records why the Johnson women were exempted, but the change gave them the same social standing as white women who were not taxed. In the colonies back then, one was judged more on their religion as opposed to race or ethnicity in general, so until the advent of actual legal slavery, upward mobility was possible for many races. During the case, the justices noted that Anthony and Mary Johnson had lived in Virginia for over 30 years and were highly respected in their community. In fact, a 1653 Northampton County Court document lists Mary as Anthony's wife. By the 1650s, Anthony and Mary Johnson were farming 250 acres in Northampton County, while their 2 sons owned 550 acres. They also had additional indentured persons under contract, but the exact numbers are not known. His son Richard Johnson also had his own indentured persons, probably given to him by his father, who were effectively slaves with a shelf life. At some point, if contracted, they would have to be set free. In 1854, John Cassor, who had been sentenced to indentured service for life for his escaping a previous owner in 1640, filed a suit against Johnson, claiming his indentured service had expired, and he went to work for Robert and George Parker. Johnson filed a freedom suit to get Cassor back, but Parker won. What is amazing in retrospect was that Johnson, a black man, was not only able to file a petition to the court, but he was able to testify and give evidence in the court, which illustrates the rather egalitarian system in place at that time. However, Johnson appealed to the County Court of Northampton County, Virginia, and the court reversed its ruling and sent Cassor back to Johnson in 1855, and Parker was forced to pay Johnson compensation. Then Cassor made history, as he was probably the first person who was declared slave for life in Virginia. That means that his black owner, Anthony Johnson, was probably the very first slave owner in all of the colonies, himself a black man. There were both black and white indentured servants, the whites being the most Irish of all, who, like the blacks, were also sentenced to lifetime servitude before Cassor's case. The difference was that the whites could eventually purchase their freedom in most cases. Therefore, Anthony Johnson was apparently not only the first African American whose right to own a slave for life was recognized in the colonies, he was therefore technically the first actual legal slave owner, regardless of being black or white, as established by the Virginia court. Soon afterwards, slavery was legal in all of the colonies. Later, Johnson moved his family to Somerset County, Maryland, and leased 300 acres for tobacco farming for 99 years, which he called Torrey's Vineyards. When Anthony Johnson died in 1670, that August his plantation was given to Robert Parker, not to Johnson's children. The justification delivered by an all-right jury ruled that Anthony's land in Virginia that was given to his sons could be seized because he was a Negro and by consequence an alien. As a result, the 50 acres that Anthony had given to his son Richard wound up in the hands of his wealthy white neighbor George Parker.
This is heavy, man. This is heavy, man. It's a hard watch. Uh, for one, like I always say, this kind of information is never taught in schools, right? It's always kind of, the one-sided story, or they'll leave out, specifics and details that kind of shows the whole picture. You know what I mean? But it just seems like, him. Okay, so him being the first technical slave owner and being a black person, man, is it's a hard fact to swallow. I'm not gonna hold y'all, but the most detrimental part of this is his land that he worked for, he earned. There's no shortcuts back in these days. There are zero, especially if you're for a black person coming from an indentured servitude. There are no shortcuts back in these days. No handouts. So it's kind of like you have to know what you're doing, know the law, know the legislation, and make the smartest moves possible for you and your family. And for him to have acquired all that land just for it to be taken back from him and his family after he passed away and is given to his neighbor is ridiculous. Is ridiculous, because within that, we don't, that land still sits there. And the owner of it is, got passed it, probably either sold it to somebody else and made a profit, or passed it down to to somebody in his family who's benefiting from that land to this day. And those are just the options there. Right now, this land, that the land he was currently on, is probably part of a small city. You know what I mean? So it's just terrible, man. For a person to work that hard. Now, him being a slave owner is crazy. Not gonna hold y'all there. That's crazy. Um, or the first slave owner. But to me, his land being taken is I mean, and then his family, it ain't done yet. So his family probably went back into indentured servitude. Probably. Let's find out. Let's see what happened to his family if it's on here.
Anthony had given to his son Richard wound up in the hands of his wealthy white neighbor George Parker. It didn't matter that Richard, a free man, had lived on the land with his wife and children for 5 years. A judge then had ruled that Anthony Johnson, as he was not a citizen of the colony because he was black, but he did own his own slaves, could maintain his property. What soon arrived after Johnson's death was a system of legal slavery in which enslavement was lifelong, hereditary, and based solely on race, and effectively established in all of the colonies in the beginning of the 18th century. As a result, Johnson has been referred to historically as the Black Patriarch of the first community of Negro property owners in America. He was the first black slave owner to be involved in a court case that resulted in an indentured black man, John Castor, to be legally determined as a slave for life. In effect, because hereditary slavery was not in effect during his period of ownership of Castor, the slave for life, and others he purchased, it is arguable that Anthony Johnson was in fact the first actual slave owner in the American colonies, and he was a black man. We hope you enjoyed this segment of Forgotten History. Please click like and subscribe for free.
For sure.
And please stay tuned and be engaged and informed. Send us comments if you have questions or even show ideas, and we will respond to all requests and comments as soon as we can. Thank you.
All right, so I will leave a link in the description to this forgotten. Hold on, let me bat this thing on out. Forgotten History channel right now. I'll leave a link in the description to watch the full video and watch other videos of this channels. I mean, I'm actually left speechless, you guys, because it's like, can you draw a straight line between his actions and how history played out, how slavery played out? I think that slavery would have, as far as permanently owning people, that was going to happen anyway. He was probably the first person to do it or had played a part in it, but I think that was going to happen anyway. Eventually, over time, I think he was the first person to come up with the idea of doing it. And his neighbors probably like, "Oh, you own a slave? You own them forever? That's a good idea." So he probably gave others the idea. But I mean, it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow, man. I ain't gonna hold y'all, man. Be honest with you guys. Comment down below what you guys want to see next. Make sure you guys hit this video with a thumbs up so we can push this video up. And until next time, you guys be safe out there. Peace.